We'll call this City Council Workshop of November 18th, 2024 to order. I will entertain a motion to set the agenda.
Motion to set the agenda.
Motion made by Alex, seconded by Catherine. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? The agenda is set. So that leads us to item B1, Citizen Advisory Board interviews. We interviewed a number of candidates, I believe 5 on November 4th, and we have 2 more applications and interviewees to interview today for the Main Street DBDA boards. So first, I'm assuming it's in the order that doesn't matter. Wendy Hostetler first, yes. If you can just come up and speak at the podium, and I mean, I think we all know you, but you can state your name and give us a little bit of background on why you're interested in this board and why you think you'd be a good fit. And we'll have some questions, no doubt.
Sure. I'm Wendy Hostetler. I'm at 217 South Central Avenue in Belmont. I've lived in Belmont for 24 years and have been started my business here, Garibaldi Realty, and still flourishing to this day. So I really have enjoyed being in Belmont, being a citizen, and being an active volunteer as well. I've served on some other advisory boards and committees, and I've always thought that this particular board would be interesting. I was on the design committee, which is a step down from this board, and really enjoyed doing the different things that we did under that committee.
All right, very good. Any questions for Wendy?
Start. Yeah.
Go.
So, hey, Wendy.
Hey.
So, why are you ultimately interested in joining this board?
Just so that way I can continue to volunteer in Belmont. For the last 2 years, I've had to take a break because of a renovation project that we've been part of, and now I'm ready to get back into the swing of things again.
Thank you.
And I think when you were involved on the design subcommittee, you had some ideas that we've done. Were you the one who had the idea for Moonlight on Main?
That was me, yes.
Yes.
But it was a big group effort. Everybody came forward and put on a really big production that night, so that was really great.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of people that came from out of town and really enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm. But certainly the catalyst, the idea has to come from somewhere. Obviously, there's lots of work in the execution of it. But
Oh, definitely.
that's the kind of thing that obviously that was a great event for the city. So
It really brought in a lot of people for the city.
What do you view as the primary mission of the Main Street Board and DBDA?
I feel like it's to help serve the downtown businesses in many different capacities, whether it's through social media. I know that there's different aspects of different things like that happening, but also with bringing in businesses that help support the downtown businesses. Bring in people that will help support the businesses. So the ultimate objective would be to make sure that they grow and flourish and bring in, not that this board would do that, but to help bring in some new businesses as well. And I think that could be an attraction.
The Moonlight on Main was a fantastic exhibit. I commend you on that. Are there any specific, in addition to something like that, any particular themes or types of events that you feel like would be appropriate for the downtown area, or maybe some that you feel like may not be appropriate?
Definitely not anything I don't feel like is appropriate. I think everything that is being done is very well executed.
Not in the past, but I'm saying in the future.
In the
Any ideas
future.
that maybe haven't been considered yet, but maybe may not be the best setting, or you know what I mean?
Yes.
Seems like I just shared a big
Give you all my ideas. No, I have some thoughts on different things, but it depends upon what the direction of the group that they would like to do. And, it could be anything. It depends upon what the budgets are, and all that.
Yeah.
I wasn't able to make the coffee event that the Main Street Board had, but just kind of a point of clarification, I know that Wendy has reached out to our Main Street program and has tried to help of help out with our own downtown, so yeah, just wanted to call that out. Appreciate it.
Which is quite a challenge.
Yes.
It is a challenge. We actually have a very different business coming in. We had bought the property on Airline, and they have the food trucks right beside it. So Rico went up the street. So we have someone, and I'm going to tell you, it's a donut. They make homemade donuts. They have
All right.
homemade lemonade, and they have a TV where you can see them making the donuts. So they're super fresh. And there isn't anything like that in downtown. So that's kind of what I'm thinking is something that doesn't exist, so it's not a competition.
Well, that sounds very exciting. I'm looking forward to it already.
Sounds like you'll be the first one.
Yes, yes.
It'll be the ribbon cutting.
I will be under it, yes.
They should be up and going by December 1.
Very good. So we'll be looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you. You have a good evening.
You too. All right. Next up, we have Katie Bradley, knee carpenter, right? Yes.
And your
Newly
South Point-
Bradley.
And her South Point colors.
I'm still not used to it at all, but that's okay.
And her South Point colors.
I am. Well, I do work at South Point. So.
Right. I know.
Yes, so I am Katie Bradley. I formerly am, well, I guess still kind of am, but Katie Carpenter. I currently live in downtown Belmont, and I'm pretty excited to even be considered. And when I found, when I did some research and found out all about this board, I was pretty excited to apply and then kind of use some of my past skills and my current skills to hopefully keep changing Belmont. I've literally lived here my entire life, besides a few years that I lived in Huntsville, Alabama.
Well, then you did not literally live here.
Well, true, okay, yes, but I feel like I have. Even when I was not actually physically here, I feel like my permanent address is still here. But my parents have still lived or my mom has still lived in the same house since I was in kindergarten. But it's always been my home, so I never knew where my life would take me, but I'm so glad that I ended up back here and back in my alma mater.
She never uttered the words roll tide.
Never. Always go back.
Thank you.
No War Eagle, no Roll Tide.
What? I didn't hear that. Pack? Like the Green Bay Packers, maybe?
Oh, no. My red and black is very red and black for, the wolf pack.
Well, now you're talking to city manager's language.
I didn't see I was in Raleigh last month. I didn't see a lot of red and black at the end of the Wake Forest game.
Oh my God. So, we built a lot of perseverance being state fans because, then we may end up being ACC champions. You never know.
Now,
That could happen again. It wasn't expected last year.
This is all great. You talked about sort of your career, and so why don't you elaborate a little bit on how you think your previous work can translate into being an effective member of the Main Street DBDA board?
Sure. So I actually spent my 20, so about 10 years, a little over 10 years in TV broadcasting and marketing. And that's what originally took me to Huntsville, Alabama. Now, long story, I always wanted to be a teacher, never just went a different direction, and I'm very glad I did. But in Huntsville, the one thing I saw that I see here as well is they totally revitalized that area. So it's where Space Camp is, it's where Rocket City, yes, it's Rocket City. So it was really cool, especially being on the media side, just to kind of see and really be at the forefront of all the things that were changing. And it was just such a cool thing to see, they were taking these old buildings and transforming them, not tearing them down, but transforming them into arcades or just different things that were for just different demographics. And that's something I see happening here, where we do have different demographics that are being targeted through these different events. And some of them, they have been around since I was very young. But then there's some that are coming about and then changing and really catering to not only my kids, but my mom and her demographics as well. But that was the coolest thing. The coolest thing to see, though, was just I remember when I would talk about Huntsville people, and I even didn't know much about it when I was offered the job there. It was really intriguing to see just how much that had changed, and I then started seeing that happen here while I was there. And then I also know that I will always say that I'm very glad I did not start teaching right out of college. I think that, my experience in marketing and communication and broadcasting really helped me to be able to talk and just not be afraid to like speak whatever my ideas are, and also not be afraid to hear what other people's opinions of you are. But I do think that was just something that I really enjoyed, was getting to see how things change. But then when I came back here, also to see how things are continuing to change as well. I may not know all the really side of things, or like how businesses come, but I do see that it's really cool how we have things now. So I was explaining to my husband actually the other day, I was like, it's really cool that we have cherubs that has my favorite liver mush, and he thinks it's disgusting, but that they have the
I love liver mush.
but I love some liver mush, but how they have the liver mush breakfast, but then we also have honeycomb. That's a totally different target audience. So those two very much cater to just two different kinds of people, and I think that's what part of what's also bringing, I know people that are my age, bringing them back here, because it's constantly changing and it still has that charm, even though it's growing and developing.
Any other questions for Chief?
I would ask one of the same questions I asked the previous candidate about kind of what you view as the main mission of this board, the Main Street Board, and the DBDA.
So I think the main mission would be not only catering to what the downtown businesses are, but also to what the community of Belmont is. And I think that there's a little bit of, the hand kind of goes both ways in a way, where like, if we have great businesses, but we aren't really catering to what the community needs, then we're gonna have these great businesses that maybe don't last for a long time. And then the other side of it is that if we're not catering to those businesses, then we're gonna have some businesses here, but we have all these great people here. But, we really do wanna, have like those, the targeted, like for instance, the honeycomb and the cherubs, where like it's covering many different audiences.
Right.
I think that's a good answer.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah,
balanced,
that's a-
it's a
yeah.
balanced approach.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What about, I know with a lot of our events, it requires a lot of volunteer hours. Whether it's Friday Night Live or something like the traveling exhibits, the DVDA staff a lot of times are the ones that are front and center volunteering. Would your schedule permit you to be able to be available?
Yes, so that is one thing that I have a very supportive family. My husband is actually at our swim meet right now, volunteering.
Did you say swimming?
Yes,
Indoors, yeah.
yes. Swim meet, yes, and the wife. But he actually was visit from here, but he's really seeing, it's kind of funny like whenever we go anywhere, because he's like, oh my gosh, you know so many different people, and we have our daughter involved in dance, and I mean, and then our son in soccer. And so I have just the best support system. I mean, my mom's taking care of my dog all the time, which is great. She's a little old and a little diabetic, but that's fine. But it's just having that support system, but also one thing that I really have enjoyed about even being at South Point is the amount of, I know that I have the privilege of working with my former teachers, but having their support as well. And one thing I did learn in my past life that carries over now is my work-life balance of knowing what I'm able to do and what I'm able to not do.
Okay. Sort of piggybacking on that, so, at this moment, the Main Street DBDA meetings are at 9 o'clock on Wednesdays, the third, 9 o'clock, isn't it? On the third Wednesday of every month. Is that going to be a problem considering your teaching duties?
Well, I mean, it could be, and that's something that I would have to talk with my principal about, because that would require me to have a sub. Because I currently have fourth period planning, but that's also something that, just depending on how, I think that is something that's worth talking with Dr. Allen about, just to see what kind of flexibility I would have or would not have in that aspect.
I think that's not a discussion for today, but I think that's something we need to revisit.
Agreed. And I think, regardless of the candidate or
Yeah.
anything like that,
Yeah, not-
I do think it limits people who may want to join this, as myself as a board member of this,
I could
for a council delegation, where you just cannot swing attending these meetings.
Yeah.
So I think that's a different discussion, and probably shouldn't be a qualifier in regards to
Yeah.
what we decide.
I agree 100%.
In my opinion.
Yeah. That was a good point, bring up, Jim. Good job.
I do what I can. Any other questions, Kate?
No, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank
Thanks for what you do for our kids.
Yeah.
Yes,
Thank you guys, thank
much.
you for what y'all do. I
What do you
appreciate it.
teach? You're a math teacher?
I am a math teacher, yes.
Which math?
I teach Math 1 and Foundations of Math 1.
Which is like what?
Primarily, so it would be what we would all consider Algebra 1,
Oh, okay.
and then kind of like the pre-algebra aspect of it, but it's primarily 9th grade that I teach. It's
So none of that,
always
like,
something.
secant, sine and cosine?
All y equals mx plus b, all of that stuff. That's what I live and breathe.
A lot of parabola for you.
Oh, and I actually showed my students today the quadratic formula song that I started.
Oh my gosh.
They did not love it, but I loved it. But anyways, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so that concludes our interviews. So that takes us now to the next item, which is Citizen Advisory Board appointments. So we have our two candidates today, Wendy and Katie, and then don't forget our 5 previous candidates, Brian Frederick, Mandy Volrath, Cynthia Tilley, Richard Loftus, and Rick Jordan. So I guess we are to discuss and make the appointments. We have 2 appointments for full three-year terms, as we have 2 current board members not seeking reappointment.
I'll go ahead and start off. I think that Wendy would be an amazing candidate.
Agrees.
I think she is plugged into the community in many different ways. I think she is solid. I mean, her resume, she didn't have to say much, just reading and knowing what she's done for our community, I think it says enough.
Especially her experience with bringing businesses downtown and having to locate space and being a new owner downtown again.
Yeah, and just her drive to want to serve the
No problem,
downtown
properties.
businesses.
I think I think she's a shoe-in for this. Moonlight on Main was an exceptional event that brought
Yeah,
a
that was,
massive amount of tourism and revenue to our downtown businesses. As I mentioned, she actively works with the community and the existing board on trying to place new businesses in downtown. And of course, her and her husband do, I think I might be biased because I'm on the Historic Belmont Foundation, but they do a lot for the community. So
You're on that?
I'm the chair of it.
I had no clue.
Yeah.
Is there a motion to nominate?
I'll make the motion to nominate Wendy Hostetler
and I'll
as
second that.
one of the board appointments. for
All right.
election.
Motion made by Alex, seconded by Catherine. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, passes unanimously. Wendy Hostetler is appointed for a 3-year term. So that leaves us with 1 position remaining.
I'm stuck between Katie and Mandy, I'm just gonna be honest.
Mandy was the one that moved from Asheville. is that right?
Yeah.
Is
That
that the one
basically
that's over
organized the
Charlotte?
symphony.
Yeah.
The
I agree with Catherine on that. I think, talking about experience, Mandy did bring the Charlotte Symphony here, which Cassie, correct me if I'm wrong, that was the first time the Charlotte Symphony's played in Belmont, or is it like
It was the first time or the first time
in
in
a long
Like
time?
20-some
Played
years.
at church one time.
Oh, okay, they played at First Pres. I think that's a really cool thing, to try to kind of broaden our approach to the cultures in downtown Belmont. I think Katie also, kind of her enthusiasm and her prior experience in marketing could also bring a lot of stuff to the table.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about to balance, like, you have ones that are plugged in, like Wendy, that has a lot of connections, like Moonlight on Main, and then you want to kind of grab other personalities. You don't want to get the same personality for every seat, otherwise we're doing a disservice to the board. So I think it's important that we really think about, that aspect as well.
One of the things that Katie said that really stuck out to me was, and I didn't hear anybody else say this, and it was supporting the businesses that are already there. I feel like that's a huge thing that kind of gets overlooked. It's always, how do we be more creative? How do we get this event or that event, but nobody really focuses, it seems like, on the businesses that are already there.
Yeah,
And she made that a point to say that, and I thought that was a really,
and the comment about balancing between what the community wants and. what
I wrote that down, community,
Yeah.
Belmont is, and then
Yeah.
slash
That's-
balance. I thought that was
on
spot on.
point. I mean,
I agree.
I do think that Mandy is incredible. I mean,
Yeah.
what she can bring to the table is,
I think both of them have
the
really-
sky's the limit. But
Mhm.
again, Katie, I didn't even know that because of her married name, even though it said formerly Carpenter, it didn't click in my head that it was Katie. But her personality and her drive, and she's very professional. I think she'd bring a lot to the table too.
Jim, your comments?
I think either one of them would make a good candidate. I do like that, Mandy basically took the lead on bringing the
Yeah.
symphony here. I mean, that's a huge undertaking, and certainly we need logistical support
Sure.
and experience as well. In his somewhat, enthusiasm, I'm not particularly known as a very enthusiastic.
It depends on the topic.
I suppose that's true, but, at some point enthusiasm gets you so far, you need someone to actually organize and bring the things to fruition. So I would say, a lot of times these are difficult decisions on the Main Street boards. We have a lot of great candidates. Whoever we decide, I would reach out to the other candidates and suggest that they become involved in one of the subcommittees, because that's usually, this round, other than Wendy,
Yeah.
who had previous experience on the subcommittee, usually they work on the subcommittees, and then after doing that, they elevate to the main board, and sort of their work on the subcommittees indicates that they're going to be a good, responsible worker with a lot of ideas. So
Who currently sits on this board?
who sits on the Main Street board?
Yes.
Well, Jennifer Church and Joe Jordan are rotating off.
Right.
So you have Al Wall,
Amy,
Amy Grossard,
Steph?
Seth Sharon, Susan Martello, Kelly Glantz,
And you.
me, Alex. There's got to be.
Alex, you're rolling off?
Huh?
Are you rolling off?
No, I'm not full of.
Kevin is the board secretary. Am I missing one?
We're missing.
I feel like I'm
Well, Summer is also helping out,
Yeah.
Brittany, Cassidy, and of course Cassidy. Isn't there one more?
There's 11 in total.
Yeah. Al.
We're missing someone.
Are there any teachers on the board?
No.
No. I feel like we're missing,
We are.
but you get the gist of it.
This board, to me, requires a lot more hours and participation than a lot of our boards do outside of just the board meetings. And I can't recall Mandy's schedule right now. It seems like she had a couple of small children maybe, and you guys recall her availability.
Well, she worked for,
Oh, yeah,
Liz.
Liz Silcox.
Liz,
Yeah.
Liz, don't take that personally.
Yeah. I hope she's not watching.
She worked for Mandy worked for the.
For the symphony.
Yeah.
It still does, I believe.
Still does.
So,
Yeah.
But that probably affords the flexibility that I've got.
Mhm.
I'm good with either Katie or Andy, so.
Yeah.
Just,
In here.
make a motion for one or the other. Support.
Katie has children, right? Didn't she say that?
Well, she just got married.
Well, I
Oh.
mean, you can't.
Hey, I was at the retreat, so maybe we shouldn't be talking about this with respect to either one of them.
I say that to say there's a focus on children, and a lot of these events you want families to come out. So I like the fact that Katie is a teacher. She's around kids most of the day, so she would have that focus.
And how many people that sit on this board is from Belmont? All of them, well, obviously they all live
You
in
mean
Belmont,
actually
but like originally
From or currently or
Well,
from?
that's an
Because that's the,
interesting thing to talk about too,
Yes.
is people who
Like
live in Belmont, people
versus-
who don't live in Belmont, who sat on the board, but I think the line is drawn if you own business or property downtown,
And we can,
allows you to.
I think that's worth discussing further, and I know Jason has brought that up as well. I don't think we need to worry about that
Tonight.
tonight, because both of them
My point
are
is
from,
that Katie is
Yeah.
originally from Belmont, this is her hometown. She does bring that factor into play. Mandy, of course, her background with the Charlotte Symphony, I mean, that's huge too, so this is hard.
yeah.
I feel like both put in the position if we filled one, like, let's say you put Mandy in there, or put Katie in there, the other one would just join the subcommittee, which I think is good, because I think both candidates are really good assets to the board itself.
Yes.
So again, that's why I feel pretty comfortable. one way or
Yes.
the other.
do the subcommittees meet in that same time slot, or they have a
Different,
Yeah,
it's
different.
like economic vitality meets maybe at 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah.
Design meets more at like 11 or 12, or I'm not sure when the other.
You're right.
Yeah, so you
They
can,
need
We're
to
limited.
be-
We're limited.
it can sort of depend on who the chair of the committee is and sort of conducive to their schedule. So, well, we're not picking a member of Trump's cabinet. So, whatever, I think unless anyone has any further insight, we should probably.
I'll make a motion to nominate Katie.
Second.
All right, motion made by Charlie, seconded by Alex. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, Katie Bradley is appointed to the second position, and I would recommend certainly reaching out to the unnominated candidates and invite them to participate in one of the subcommittees. Certainly, I think Mandy would be good for promotions. That seems to be.
Well, you never know.
Yeah.
A lot of time people's careers, they want to do something.
Get away from them.
Yeah.
But
Well, I would just reach out to them and again encourage them to get involved in subcommittees, and then the next time there's an open position, they have an even stronger resume.
Hey, Jim, not discussion for tonight, but if there's a consensus, I'd like to try to get us penciled in for a workshop or agenda item to discuss the time of the meeting of the Main Street program.
And the residency requirement.
Yes, that's fine. I can bring it up. We're meeting Wednesday, so perhaps.
We'll be in the office Wednesday.
Yes, I realize that. But I have to bring it up at the meeting, and that's what the meetings are. Perhaps, I don't know, maybe even our new board members. It's short notice, but we'll see.
And yeah.
Are Jennifer and Joe still on the board, or are they officially off? Okay.
Is that term on calendar? Is it calendar year? Oh, it's not.
It just
When's it?
depends.
When is it?
theirs were in October.
October. Okay.
It just depends on when you are applying.
So these appointments are effective immediately once they're notified.
So these candidates we just voted on are expected to be there Wednesday.
Yeah, well, as long as
They can't. I wouldn't make
Not that they're
that.
gonna hold your feet to the fire, but.
Yeah, they could conceivably,
Yes.
in a perfect world, but.
Okay.
All right, but yeah, and I saw Joe last week, and it was in another context. I meant to bring that up, the residency thing, but since we're undertaking a bylaw review anyway, so. But I'll try and bring that up Wednesday.
Okay.
Both of those subjects.
Thanks, Jim.
And, well, since Cassie will be there too, hold me to that. Yes. Okay. All right, very good. So we move on to item B3, consider approval of interlocal agreement with Gaston County for planning assistance. And our assistant manager, Kevin Kraus, will be presenting this topic. Good evening.
I can make this very quick for you.
Amazing.
This is simply a mechanism to put in place to allow us to work with Gaston County, and they would be there to provide some relief for planning on an as-needed basis for plat review and some site plan review as needed.
So is Peyton getting help?
That's whoever they would like to assign.
She leaves the city of Belmont
I know.
and has to help the city of Belmont.
And no cost to us, the cost will be passed through to the customer.
I think this is pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
I will, I had some edits. None of them were substantive. It was all about like capitalizing things and defining terms, and I believe that they've been made, nothing substantive. My only question was, there was something in section 4 about reference to the city of Belmont, and I just wanted to, that the county shall have the authority to review requested plans and plats of properties within the city of Belmont, and I wanted to make sure that that would include the ETJ.
Yes, it's the planning jurisdiction is what the intent is.
Okay. That was my
So
question.
we'll clarify that and add that specific wording.
Okay.
Do we need to vote on this one?
On the,
Yes.
one question. On the fee schedule, do each of those itemized responsibilities, I guess, does that basically include the whole scope of the work that we would be asking them to do, or are there other things that may not be?
So for these, what we would do, if it's a site plan review, everything would be handled with Gaston County. So they'll go through Gaston County's portal and pay that fee. So they'll pay they'll pay the fee instead of us paying that fee based on this agreement. Because that's, I see that there's a fee in here, but they're supposed to go through that portal process. Isn't that correct? And do the whole thing through the portal.
We'll double check, well, if this is approved, what we would plan to do is sit down and have that entire process conversation with guests and having to confirm. how
Did I hear
the-
you say that if there's an increase in the fee for any of these items, that would be passed through to the applicant?
We'll review our fees go each year, so if they change, then we will need to.
Right.
Is that just an amendment to the agreement? Because it just continues unless otherwise stated. Would you guys have to amend it each year, I guess?
If the fees change, I do think they have to amend
Okay.
the agreement. You'd have to replace Exhibit A with an updated Exhibit A.
Whereas I don't think it's an issue.
I mean, hopefully, the idea, I think, Tiffany, would be that this does not last very long, that it's a more of a temporary measure until we get our staff up to.
Yes.
Except for the plat review, we foresee that going on further because it works out better that way anyway.
Is there a reason why we wouldn't just continue this kind of arrangement in perpetuity as opposed to, and this is just pure ignorance asking, as opposed to hiring it internally? Is there like an advantage versus?
Well, we still have positions that are open that are unfilled.
Right.
Once we get those, we may have the capacity to do most of this
Okay.
in-house. So it's wouldn't be eliminating a position to do this. This is really gets us through the tough time we have now transitioning, and then it's always there as an on-call if needed.
That makes sense.
And it also helps our current staff because they're gonna get to shadow some of the county planners and
Who used to be our planners.
some of them are, yes.
So to the extent that any of these fees are more than, I guess, what we would charge if they did come through the city for these things, right, that difference is gonna be absorbed by the city, not,
The
No,
customer.
The intent of this, really, I know that there is that fee schedule there, and that's if they came to us and we routed everything for the customer.
okay,
And talking with the county, the best way we think, and it'll be finalized with Tiffany, we can talk through it, is to, if they come to us and we decide on, a site plan that comes through the door, this is a good one for Gaston County to just handle. So we'll tell that customer to go to Gaston County and enter it through Gaston County's portal, and they'll take it from beginning to the end. So there would be no fee exchange, unless there was something we did after the fact.
I see.
Some kind of, I don't know, recording fees or anything like that.
okay. So the fees are pretty comparable whether they go through the city directly or through the county, is that what you're saying?
You mean comparable our fees versus the county
Yes.
fees? I'm not sure if ours are more or less than the county.
Okay.
I didn't look at that.
I just don't want to offload that burden on the,
They seem very reasonable.
yeah, okay.
And very, did you look at the
You know
fees?
better
It's
than
very
I.
similar to ours.
They're
Yes.
calculated differently, so they're not, dollar for dollar. That'll be part of the logistics that if you all are comfortable with us moving forward with this agreement, we would sort out and figure out with the county on making sure the burden is equitably distributed regardless of who's doing the paying.
Yeah, that's all I'm asking, yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions for Kevin?
Fees look less, I think.
Really?
than the per fee.
Okay.
Yeah.
That works.
No, I'd like to make a motion to approve as presented, with Jim's modification with the grammatical errors. Or,
Motion to approve as amended,
yeah, as amended by Jim.
Okay.
Second.
All right, motion by Alex, seconded by Jason. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the interlocal agreement is unanimously adopted. Thank you, Kevin. Next, we have B4, special use permits discussion, which should be fresh in our minds since we just dealt with 2 last month.
Perfect. Yes, this item is to bring for your consideration the future of special use permits within the city of Belmont. Hold on.
I have to turn it on.
That would certainly help. Yes. Let's try again. Maybe it would help.
Turn it off, turn it back on.
Give the keyboard.
Further
Slow on
amendment.
it. That's okay, quality. just started. What we're specifically talking about is special use permits, which is a permit issued to authorize development of a land use in a particular zoning district that has to present competent material and substantial evidence to prove that they can comply with our general standards, and that they meet specific findings. So, in our current land development code, I just wanted to kind of run through these really quickly. There are a large variety of different scenarios where someone might be asked to pursue a special use permit if they want consideration of certain things. So, this includes any building 50,000 square foot or greater in certain zoning districts. This is not true of each one of these categories in every zoning district, but there are certain times within the code that a special use permit may apply to any of the things that I'm about to mention. A workplace building and where it's located, any event facility, temporary amusements, funeral homes, private nightclubs, drive-through commercial. Lot widths below a certain lot average, those are the ones that you all heard the other evening, where they are looking for consideration of a specific lot width. Any temporary structures in institutional uses, specifically offices, classrooms, and housing. If a garage is desired in a front yard, specifically for waterfront lots or lots over an acre. If an apartment building wants an accessory structure, if it's over a certain size. Civic uses that are over 25,000 square feet. Duplexes on lots over 10,000 square feet. And if somebody exceeds a required parking ratio by more than double, they would also be required to go through a special use permit process. If somebody is seeking parking in the front yard of a commercial use, if they would like to do an adult store or establishment, an automotive sales or service facility, neighborhood or heavy manufacturing uses, essential services.
Was that the one we did last year, heavy manufacturing?
Heavy manufacturing, exactly. That is like the one we did last year for the industrial user over on Brook Street.
What about parking in the front yard for residential uses without a permit?
Well, parking,
That was a joke.
you mean in the
Sorry.
grass?
That was a joke. We have some of those.
Yeah, we have two different kinds. You can park in the alley or you can park on the street. That's a whole other topic for another day.
Yeah.
But yeah, so essential services, any sort of cell tower or electrical substation could require a special use permit. Hospitals, special use permit, and blood plasma facilities. So the other option for these, and they might still come before you, is if any of these desire to go through conditional zoning, our ordinance allows for certain uses to either do a special use permit or conditional zoning. So it just depends. So for instance, the hospital you all approved through conditional zoning, but it could have, if it met all the provisions and didn't need relief, come through as a special use permit. Now, since that time, we've reduced the building footprint requirement of when it would trigger conditional zoning anyway. So there's a different level of discretion that would automatically bring those kinds of larger buildings before you and city council. But in our ordinance, all these examples are listed in certain scenarios as having the possibility to require a special use permit.
I have a question, Tiffany, to that.
Yes.
And again, I'm not trying to say this for one way or the other, but I'm trying to remember our discussions, because we had the same discussion, I felt like 3 years ago, when we were talking about SUPs, or like the council's dislike for it at the time, or whatever. Is there a way to even do away with SUPs and then just put it conditional? Like, do we have to have an SUP format, I guess is what I'm trying to ask?
I have to do some more research on if it's a requirement to allow that option by the state of North Carolina, but it is given certain guidelines within the state of North Carolina. And the difference is there's different findings. So conditional is really supposed to be if somebody's asking for relief of your ordinance requirement. Special use permits are not that way. They're really intended for somebody who meets your ordinance, but there might be certain specific situations that you want additional discretion, or it's not really discretionary, but it's like you want to make sure that public safety is being factored in, right? That site specifically, that there's some considerations on that specific location that are given that would make sure that that use in that specific location is a good fit.
But it comes to us as an SUP because it doesn't meet one of the criteria that we have in our existing code. So that's why I get confused
Sure.
as what.
Well, not necessarily, because there can be other items that meet all aspects of the code, but the code just says if you want to do this type of use in this district, it will only be allowed by a special use permit. And everything else that they do is proper. So like that was sort of, going back to last year, because what they were doing with the schools and everything was defined as, or it was the way the definition was interpreted, it was a heavy industrial, or heavy machinery or something like that, and that could only be granted by a special use permit in that zoning district.
That's correct, and some of this is because, we can craft an ordinance with certain requirements for certain uses the best that we can. But there are things that are site-specific to properties that have certain uses that you may want some additional regulation to make sure you can meet those findings. For instance, the one on Brook Street was right next to a city park. So there might be different buffering requirements you want on that site specifically because of it being located next to a city park, that maybe you wouldn't have the same buffer requirement to make the finding that it's not harmful for the community character in a different scenario, or maybe you'd require a greater one. So it lets you kind of refine it a little bit different. The other thing is that with conditional zoning, there are minimum lot requirements in order for someone to pursue conditional zoning. So for instance, in general residential, if somebody wanted to do conditional zoning, but their lot is less than 15 acres, they are not eligible for coming before you to request conditional zoning. So there are some of these uses, in fact, probably a majority of them, that would fall under the minimum lot size requirement for a conditional zoning request. So the special use permit is an alternative option that allows for a discretion for smaller sites to be able to still have that, and it's a different type of decision that's made on evidence and fact to say this use is allowable in a certain scenario, and we just want to make sure it's a good fit at the location that you've chosen, right? But we're generally okay with it. We just wanted to do our due diligence to make sure that it meets the needs of the surrounding neighbors, right? And that we're doing it in a respectful way. And so that's one of the reasons why the state allows us to go through this special use permit process, which is a quasi-judicial decision that is based on evidence and fact, and then that burden is put on the applicant to prove that they can be a good neighbor where they're currently sited, that they've done their due diligence to make sure. And some of that is distance from a church sometimes. Sometimes it's different distance from a civic use like a school. Sometimes it's buffers. It just really depends. And you can see that there's this long list, but practically the ones that we see come before you the most are the lot widths. I mean, some of these you all might not have had any awareness or even in the code, but in order to make sure that we had a transparent conversation, we wanted to make sure that you knew that all of these are different options that could. The likelihood, though, and what we're seeing is because of some of the rules you guys have already enacted on the larger, heavy manufacturing or automotive or hospitals, for example, a lot of these practically we're seeing already pursuing conditional zoning. They also, the larger the use might trigger traffic studies, which would then trigger coming before you as conditional zoning. So what we're really talking about practically are the smaller, more incremental ones that are maybe more infill type opportunities that might mainly lot width, but it could apply to all the other ones as well. So just as a reminder, these types of requests have to follow specific procedures that are outlined in our LDC in Chapter 15. And consideration of them requires an evidentiary hearing, which makes them a quasi-judicial decision. This means that, unlike some of the other cases where we can kind of talk more fluidly and candidly and where conversations can be held prior to the meeting with the applicant to make sure we understand what the purpose of the project is and let them know about what our desires are, in these types of hearings, those kinds of conversations are actually forbidden. It is very much like a court case where we have to make sure that all of the discussions about that are happening in the public eye, in the public meeting. It can't happen before the meeting. Any of that is a conflict of interest. So it's a very different setting than the types of decisions that are otherwise made by City Council. But it does allow for consideration of evidence. It does not allow for any items of relief. So let's say somebody said, well, I want to pursue a special use permit, but I also need this item for relief. They cannot do that. They would have to do a variance if they wanted that and prove a hardship, and then also get a special use permit. Or they could say, I'd actually rather just pursue conditional zoning and wrap it all into one project. Then it's coming right before you if they do that. So that's some of the differences here. And again, those findings of fact specifically related to special use permits are that they meet all the required principles and specifications of the code. So the code has to specifically allow for them to pursue a special use permit. It can't just be that they don't like the rules and they want to try to get around the rules by doing a special use permit. The code has to outline that this is an option for that type of use to be considered. They have to provide plans just like any other site plan would, and be able to have the burden to show that the proposed use, if approved, would not visually, that it is visually and functionally compatible with the surrounding area, so that burden is on the applicant, and that they would not endanger the public health or safety. So this provides the opportunity, regardless of who makes the final decision for public safety, and utilities or stormwater or anybody else, to be brought into the conversation to ensure that the work that they're planning to do does not injure the value of those adjoining property owners. So in your packet, you saw two charts for your consideration. The one was far too small of text for me to try to put on a slide, but outlining the differences between a legislative decision and a quasi-judicial decision. And then the one that is on your chart here shows, and these are directly, both of these are from the School of Government, so I did not make these up. I'll give credit directly to the School of Government. Shows a chart of different types of decisions and who primarily handles those. So if you look, right now we have special use permits reviewed by City Council. That is allowable. There's nothing in the state legislature that says that you guys cannot continue to review special use permits. It is fully within your purview to do so if you'd like to as City Council. But primarily, you can see Board of Adjustment has the primary role in most municipalities of hearing all the quasi-judicial decisions, including appeals, variances, and special use permits. So right now, our Board of Adjustment is limited to appeals and variances. What this means practically is they don't meet very often. And from a staff perspective, this means that we're either not having a lot of appeals of our administrative decisions, which is primarily positive, and that we are not seeing a lot of variance requests, meaning to us, hopefully, that means that our ordinances are not creating a substantial hardship based on a specific piece of property. It doesn't mean that everyone's able to comply, but specifically that they're not so stringent that there's pieces of lands in Belmont that have hardships with compliance with those codes. So, practically, there's some room on their agenda to add some additional capacity. We've had some members of our Board of Adjustment ask if there was more that they could do to be of benefit to the community by meeting more often and hearing more cases. So knowing that we're seeing some of these requests come in, infill's becoming more and more popular as land becomes more scarce, and trying to find that balance point. I know these decisions do take a little bit of time for your thoughtful consideration. We thought it might be worth bringing this discussion up to see if you guys wanted to continue to hear these before City Council, or because the evidence and findings are specifically laid out, if there was interest from City Council in transferring the review of these types of permits to the Board of Adjustment. And I would just welcome the discussion and feedback. If you want to do that, we'll just need to update the land development code accordingly.
Have a few comments. Jim, do you want to go first? You have your hand up.
Yeah, maybe I can just sort of set the stage and then we can, is that?
Go for it, man.
Okay.
Go for it.
Perfectly acceptable.
Okay. Because I just have so I think the issue here is why perhaps it's caused some struggle and consternation with council is that it's two different roles. Usually we sit as a legislature like Congress and we act legislatively, whereas for this we have to take off our legislative hat, even though that's what we do the whole rest of the time, and put on our quasi-judicial hat like we're judges sitting in court, and that can be difficult to transition between the two. And I think Tiffany's thinking is that the Board of Adjustment, that's all they do is quasi-judicial. So that's like the same, appeals of planning department decisions and variances, quasi-judicial. And so they're sort of acclimated to do that, whereas we're sort of transitioning between roles. The other thing I'll say is sort of to sort of the difference between what we're being asked to do, because I think we were struggling with that a couple of weeks ago. So, like, let's take like the Crescent project that we've talked to those folks, and they're coming back before us in May, and, we've got a lot of concerns and issues with that project, and so we can say, hey, we're worried about sewer capacity and water with that project, and there's been no evidence that there's an actual issue with that in any of the stuff that's come before us in the application or anything, but we can say, based on our knowledge and experience as city council representatives living in Belmont, we've got this issue other places, we think it's going to be an issue, we don't want to proceed until we get clarification about the water and sewer issues. Even though there's no evidence that there's any problems with this specific, that's perfectly okay for us to do when we're acting legislatively. There's no problem with that. And when we do that, and they either have to, satisfy our questions or they're not going to get approved, 100% appropriate. You take a look at the Hope Street subdivision that we had, that was the second one. Yeah. And in that case, you had the applicant, they made their presentation, but you also had witnesses from the neighborhood. Neighbors came and they said, fact testimony, there are no two-story structures on our block, there are no garages on our block. We've got issues with the water coming down, runoff when it rains, and there's flooding. So now there's evidence, and they have the burden, and based on that evidence, we can say, well, we want, in order to meet the findings, in order for us to feel that there's no impact to health and safety, and it's in keeping with the area and the character of the area, all right, well, we don't think you should build 2 stories, or we think you should take these steps to reduce the runoff, and we think you need to make sure, we need to be sure that the study comes back and there's sufficient capacity. That's perfectly appropriate because there is evidence in the record, fact evidence that was unrebutted by the applicant who had the burden, and we can have that discussion and impose those conditions. Where we ran into the problems was with David Street, where, again, they presented the application, they presented their evidence. There was no evidence of any water or sewer issues or any runoff or any of that. No one came and spoke and presented any evidence to the contrary. And where I think we were getting into trouble was yes, we know as citizens of Belmont that there's water and sewer issues generally in the city. There's nothing specific as to this property, but hey, why don't you do this? Hey, why don't you do that? Hey, what about this? Hey, we're concerned about that. And I think that's where we're legislating and not acting in a quasi-judicial capacity. When there's no evidence is presented, there's no problems, there's no evidence to the contrary, and we're sort of like trying to poke holes in things and say, well, what about this? What about this?
So I agree with you on the sewer capacity thing, because I remember when we kind of looked at each other when that was mentioned. But where I have a hard time at it, though, is if you have, let's say, a piece of property that has a significant slope to it, right? Okay, maybe you don't have someone come out and say, there's going to be massive water runoff. But I think we can clearly state that could be a water runoff issue if they don't provide the facts to try to mitigate it, right? I mean, you get what I'm saying here? I mean, we know water runs downhill, fact, right? I mean, and if you're not going to put in the controls to mitigate that, then you can, I feel like, pretty much be assured that water's going to roll downhill. So if they don't present the fact that stipulates it otherwise, then I feel like that's a valid point. I mean, and Parks, please feel free to weigh in. I mean, that's just how I feel when I interpret that, and maybe it's Jim's point, but, I mean, is that not something there?
That kind of goes to my question. Could you go back to, I think we'll tell in our arguments or discussion points here. Can you go back to the slide for findings and fact? There. So to me, number one is pretty black and white, right? Whether it meets the specs of the code and the land use plans. To me, though, 2 and 3 can be a little bit of a gray area, can be a little bit subjective, kind of like what we saw with the Hope Street discussion.
Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously, every permit would have to be decided based on its own facts, but I can confirm that based on my experience with special use permits over the last 5 years, that I've never had the first factor be an issue. It's always the second and third.
Right. Yeah. And so I think, to me, personally, part of our responsibility as an elected body, we have to obviously consider the facts and circumstances of each case as it's presented under the quasi-judicial pathway. But as Alex was kind of getting to, I mean, there's sort of intangible extraneous things sometimes that don't always get presented in the facts and circumstances, but may prove to have an impact one way or the other.
See, that's what I struggle with, because I think that's legislate, that intangible stuff is legislating.
Right.
Because, it's that, when the people complain about judges legislating from the bench,
Right.
is when they bring that, well, I know this is what the case says, but hey, I'm the judge, I think this instead.
But if they don't present the fact otherwise, I guess that's, again, I'm not trying to start, I think this is a healthy debate here, because, it could set us up for the future here, but, I think that's.
Well, wouldn't that have been considered before the technical review committee?
That's correct. So that's where the applicant introduced the evidence, although I just want to make sure we're not going down a rabbit hole and can kind of filter this conversation. But
Yes.
typically, the technical review committee includes department heads, right? So engineering, public works, police, fire, different, even downtown, sometimes if it's a downtown project, right? So we try to make sure that whoever needs to be in the room's in the room. For that to be able to say, hey, based on your professional opinion, do you have any concerns as it relates to this project? Here's what they're trying to do. We advise and introduce this as a special use permit and say the applicant has the burden to produce these findings. Is there any information that you have knowledge of that is important to know when they're trying to make their case? So when something comes up during the technical review committee, that information is documented by staff and then shared with the applicant so that they can respond to that accordingly in their presentation. And that information would be shared in the staff report to you all if it was disclosed.
Which was the case, I think this was before, Alex, you might remember, because you were on council, the ones on Julia. I think there were notes from the technical review committee in that
The
case.
concern based off of the
Yes.
driveway is being too close to the intersection of
Yes.
Juliet and Central or South.
Yes.
Yes, and I would say regardless, these are the findings of fact that need to be made. The question really is, who's the jury, right?
Right.
And so, you all have appointed the Board of Adjustment. And I don't know if, you have a difference of opinion on whether or not they are better suited to hear just variances and appeals versus cases like these for special use permits, or if you feel like they're doing a great job when they review the appeals and variances and would like to give them.
I don't think that's the way it should be viewed. I agree with Jason. I think this is a council's responsibility as an elected body by the citizens of Belmont. I wouldn't want to say that we don't think the Board of Adjustments could appropriately execute it. I think this is just a responsibility that sits with the elected body.
Okay.
And I would say too, we have the utmost confidence in staff and rely on you guys heavily to present us the facts so that we can, make these types of decisions. But I think, if things get enacted or approved, if it doesn't sit well with a lot of citizens, with all due respect, you guys are probably not hearing it like we are.
Well, absolutely, and that's really, just wanted to do a check-in with you guys, because we also understand that sometimes when these items come on the agenda, you all may get calls and people may want to discuss things with you ahead of time, and that can put you in a very challenging spot because there's no ex parte communication allowed with these kind of cases. And so we just wanted to reintroduce this for you all's consideration so that you're not put in that spot.
And it's hard to, because I understand what you all are saying as our elected officials, but if we're acting in a quasi-judicial capacity, we can't be thinking as elected officials. We have to be thinking as fact finders based on what's in front of us. We can think as elected leaders legislatively, like with Crescent, with Lakeview Farms, but we really, correct me if I'm wrong, Parks, we really, and I understand the sentiment behind it, but when we're actually doing it, we can't think as elected officials, legislative leaders. We have to think of as fact finders. And so if that's infecting our decisions, then we're thinking legislatively and not quasi-judicial.
Jim, I get it. You get judges, right, who are elected. An elected body reviewing cases. I mean, I don't think it's outside of the realm of possibilities to have an elected official to make a quasi-judicial decision.
That's right, I'm just making sure that we're acting quasi-judicially when we're making it. That's all.
Yeah.
I agree with you that it's fine, and I know, to your point earlier, we've had conversations in the past about special use permits and where they go, and believe it or not, when I was on the planning board, planning board used to hear special use permits, and then they just make they'd make the findings, but it wasn't binding, and it would come up to city council anyway. Is that right? I feel like we were doing that, and that was like completely useless. Because like city council would just, they still got to make the findings. What difference does it make what planning board said? But in any event, I know Mayor Turner was of the mindset that we should continue to have jurisdiction over these things, and I think that's fine. That seems to be the sentiment, which is perfectly appropriate. We've seen what it's more work for us.
Time consuming.
And more time consuming, but if we think that that's, just like with conditional zoning, and the more things that we put into conditional zoning versus by right, that makes more work for us. But if it's something that we all think it's important that we keep tabs on and that we're the ones that make the decision, then, absolutely, there's no problem with that. So, Tiffany's just explaining sort of, the lay of the land.
Sure, both are perfectly legal and they're up for discussion. We just, I think the last time we had this conversation, the council makeup was different, and so we just wanted to give you guys the opportunity to have this discussion and make sure that we were still proceeding in the right direction.
So is the consensus to keep it as is?
Yeah, I feel like that's what we're here for.
Catherine?
I agree with Jason.
Jason?
Yeah.
That's fine.
All right.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, last item is Belmont Trails project updates and discussion. Another timely topic, I think, given the turnover of recent years, and some of these projects have been sort of hanging around for a while.
How long has this been around?
Rail trail's been,
The rail trail, maybe that's the one I'm thinking of.
yeah. Abbey Creek's a little bit newer vintage, but still it's been quite a few years.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and Council, for having me to talk about this tonight. And as Mayor Pro Tem just mentioned, yes, we've had a number of these trail projects kind of lingering for the last decade or 2 decades in some cases. So this evening I'll kind of be reviewing trail and greenway projects in Belmont over that time period and showcasing, the trajectory of some of these projects, talking about how trail planning as a whole supports our city's vision, and then highlighting some completed projects and outreach efforts that we can celebrate, as well as talking through the next steps that might be needed for some of our projects that are still moving through the planning process. At the end of the presentation, I'll facilitate a discussion around the future, specifically of the Abbey Creek Greenway and Belmont Rail Trail projects, because we have a couple specific questions we'd like y'all to consider about those projects. So if y'all would mind, just kind of saving those longer discussion type questions for the end. Happy to answer any technical questions throughout, but save the discussion for the end, and then we can kind of dive in during that dedicated portion. So with that, let's see.
Good evening, Second Corporate Hearing. This is Ms. Crowder calling.
Like graceful.
The clerk might have decided to.
The keyboard is.
Oh, okay, fair enough. There we go. Perfect. So, Greenway and Trail support in our community goes back for several decades. We kind of have it documented as part of our 2003 Parks and Recreation Master Plan, as that being identified as a key need and priority for our community. And that vision has remained consistent in the 2 decades since then. It's continued to kind of be refined and supported in different ways through adopted plans like the 2013 Bicycle Master Plan and through our 2018 Comprehensive Land Use Plan. And that plan specifically supported the role of greenways both as recreational opportunities and as options for safe mobility choices under both our mobility element and our parks and recreation element of the 2018 comp plan. In 2019, we completed an update, and by we I mean Parks and Recreation, of course, but they completed an update to their Parks and Recreation master plan that called for continued support for trails and greenways based on their public engagement efforts, and also specifically called for implementation of the Abbey Creek Greenway and the rail trail, among other greenway projects. And the 2023 pedestrian master plan that was adopted last December echoed that call and emphasized the importance of those projects, in particular as safe pedestrian connections to key destinations in our community. And most recently, of course, the 2024 Vision Zero plan that we talked about last month echoed this call, but in a slightly different way. Through that safety analysis, we highlighted the need and the lack of safe pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure along some of our major heavily trafficked roadway corridors in the community where we do happen to have greenways and trails planned. So just within the context of the Abbey Creek Greenway and the rail trail in particular, those trails are designed to be located kind of running in parallel to Wilkinson Boulevard in the case of the Abbey Creek Greenway, which was identified in that Vision Zero plan as our most dangerous corridor, and then along Main Street in the case of the rail trail, which was identified as our 5th most dangerous corridor. And I will just anecdotally share that we've heard from folks throughout our engagement efforts for the comprehensive plan update over the summer. Greenways and trails continue to be a pretty big priority and continue to be a major topic of discussion. So want to just recap, and many of these studies that I'm about to reference are part of those adopted plans that I just mentioned, so you've heard this information before, but wanted to just recap why trails and greenways stand to benefit our community beyond simply being something that our residents are asking for. So most of these are referenced through our 2023 pedestrian plan, or they're completed as part of studies from groups like the Carolina Thread Trail and NCDOT. When we think about trails from a safety perspective, we often think about, providing safer alternatives for pedestrians and cyclists who are moving throughout our community. When we looked at crash data for the last 16, 17 years in Belmont, we found that 100 crashes have involved pedestrians over that time period. And we know from our Vision Zero discussion last month that in the last 5 years alone, pedestrians have been 150 times more likely to be killed when they're involved in an accident, and 40 times more likely to be severely injured if they're involved in a traffic crash than those who are just traveling within a vehicle. So noting that, it's important for our city to provide that safe pedestrian infrastructure for folks who are looking to navigate our community, especially as alternatives to having our pedestrians trying to travel along major corridors like Wilkinson Boulevard with those high traffic volumes and more severe crash trends, and in many cases a lack of existing sidewalks or multimodal infrastructure. From a health perspective, and many of us know this, but the availability of trails can positively impact healthcare outcomes and lifestyle outcomes for citizens and our visitors. A 2022 study by the Carolina Thread Trail found that trail visits save users $7 in healthcare costs for every trail visit. So every time a user is going out to a trail, completing a hike, going on a run, going for a bike ride on a trail, if you're visiting a trail once a week over the course of a year, that saves over $350 per year. And the more that you visit those trails, the more those savings increase for our regular trail users. And physical activity, whether it's happening on trails or not, is associated with reducing risks of heart failure, obesity, diabetes, and other negative health outcomes. So when we think about planning for trails and greenways in our community, along with other recreational opportunities, the more conveniently and strategically located opportunities we have for folks to engage in active recreation, the easier it becomes for our citizens to make those healthy lifestyle choices and reap the benefits. And finally, from an economic perspective, studies in North Carolina and beyond over the last several years have identified a number of positive economic benefits of trails and greenways that extend from the design and construction phases all the way through after completion to the economic benefits being experienced by nearby businesses. So NCDOT completed a study a few years ago that estimated that for every dollar invested in trail construction, communities are seeing a return on investment of $1.72, so almost doubling that investment in terms of local business revenues, the savings that residents and visitors are experiencing on health and safety costs, and then jobs supported throughout the construction process and maintenance of those trails. And a slightly earlier study, 2021, but completed by NC State University, that actually looked at 3 trails in Gaston County, as well as 3 other trails in our region, found that they were associated with $2.1 million of annual economic output per mile of trail. So trails are not only an attractive amenity that we can choose to offer citizens and visitors to keep them safe and healthy, but they're also an investment we can make in our community that promises to return that economic value to local businesses, to our local workers, and so on. So I'll take a brief moment to transition, and Cassidy, I'm going to ask for your help in this. We've created an interactive trail map, so if we can click on that link, or if it's possible, maybe I can do it. Here we go. So we've created an interactive trail map. We'll be releasing this to the public over the next few weeks through the city website.
Is that Angela Street?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's all good.
That's fine.
So we'll be making this available to the public through the city's website as a tool to help guide folks through the available trails, greenways, and the other recreational opportunities that are available to them in the city of Belmont. I'll give just a very brief, kind of tour through this right now, but folks can kind of navigate. They can see all of the parks and greenways and some of our planned recreational facilities as well along the left. And when you click on, let's see, Stowe Park as an example, it zooms in. They can read a bit more information. They can get the address. We're also planning to, add a new feature called, a locate feature. So as folks navigate this tool, they'll also be able to search for parks and greenways that are near their address or near a destination that they're visiting in our community. And when they click on a particular recreational destination, they'll also be able to click for step-by-step navigation to take them to that destination. So exciting stuff, and let me back out of this really quick, but I just want to emphasize, we have a lot of available opportunities already in our community, and we can see, many of those are concentrated in and near downtown, but when we think about not just the city-provided parks and recreation and greenway and trail opportunities, but also some of the privately maintained or county-maintained facilities like the Duke Kimbrell Trail at the Seven Oaks Preserve and at Daniel Stowe Botanical Gardens along the peninsula. We really are, we have many things to be proud of, I think, as a community in terms of the park and recreational experiences we're currently offering our residents. So this is definitely something to celebrate, that we have this many different types of opportunities.
I think that's a great tool. I heard you say it was going to be on the website. And by the way, great work to put this together.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Is that going to be on the social media pages too?
We can absolutely share that.
Yeah, I think that'd be a good idea.
Yeah,
Yes,
absolutely.
it's pretty cool. The only thing maybe you might want to add is future parks, right? Because I think Mick McLean dedicates a bunch of land to it, so you might want to put like a little sticker or tag there.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Awesome. Very cool. So we'll keep y'all posted through our weekly updates on when this goes live and any additional features that get added in the interim. But wanted to just highlight that because we really are, I think, making some strides in how we communicate to our residents and our visitors about the recreational opportunities that we offer, which is such a big part of Belmont's identity. So kind of continuing on from that, I want to focus along that same vein of kind of celebrating some of our successes. Want to briefly about Rocky Branch Park, which is a park upgrade and kind of transformation that was recently completed. And then we'll dive into some of our kind of in progress and upcoming trail projects, the rail trail, which is in kind of planning and design right now, and then the Abbey Creek Greenway, which is partially constructed, and we'll dive into that in just a couple minutes. So Rocky Branch Park was one of the stops that we made on our comprehensive plan city tour that we took with y'all and with some of the planning and zoning board members in August. And it's really been leveraged, not just by us, but also as Carolina Thread Trail kind of lifted up regionally as a great example of a successful community partnership. We worked very closely with the Tar Heel Trailblazers to do that and held several different community visioning workshops to design that transformation, as well as a multi-jurisdictional collaboration. So this project was completed in partnership with the town of Cramerton, and so Carolina Thread Trail has really lifted this up regionally as an example of great trail and park planning. The redesign began a few years ago in 2020, and the last mountain biking trails were completed earlier this year. So it's just kind of been marked as fully complete and fully open. And the park includes a 1.2 mile multi-use trail. It's got a natural surface trail for pedestrians and cyclists. It's part of the designated Carolina Thread Trail, and portions of it fall into both Belmont and Cramerton. Each community has its own trailhead, so its own access point for getting onto the trail. And both of those trailheads are within walking distance of their respective communities downtown, which means that folks can use those trails to, spend a morning walking or biking or passing time in the park, and then make their way into downtown Belmont or into downtown Cramerton to patronize our local businesses. We'll do just a quick, let's see. Yes, we also have over 5 miles of mountain biking trails, and those are all at various levels of difficulty. So we've got actually some of the most advanced mountain biking trails available in the region, but also we've got beginner and intermediate level trails, which makes this park and this experience really unique, across the board, beyond just the trail experience. So these are some images, some of the spots along the trail. You might recognize the trailhead in the top right corner from the Belmont trailhead at Saco Street. And one of the innovative features of this trail that I just want to highlight is the natural surface that was used. It was a specifically designed natural surface that was intended to kind of reflect the clay and the existing natural environment that's present in these locations across the Carolinas. So that was chosen as part of the community engagement. It was selected with the partnership and with input from community members and cyclists who are going to be using those trails. Another benefit that I've heard about, I don't personally mountain bike, but from what I hear is natural surface trail is preferred for mountain bikers because it gives them much more of an engaging experience. And of course, it also helped provide some cost savings on trail construction for this project using natural surface rather than a paved surface. So Rocky Branch Park, really the point here is to just lift this up as something to be celebrated, a big accomplishment for our community and also for the region. And now we'll dive into some of the projects that we have ongoing that hopefully will be other instances that we can celebrate in the near future. So the Belmont Rail Trail is envisioned to be a 10-foot greenway that follows a retired portion of NCDOT rail from Greenway Street in downtown Belmont all the way up along Main Street to the Belmont Abbey College campus. And it would create a critical pedestrian and bicycle connection between North Belmont and downtown that would allow Belmont Abbey students and employees to get into downtown more easily from their campus without needing to get into a car, and would also allow some easier access to and from downtown for the residents of North Belmont. In 2012, the Capital Project Ordinance was approved to fund early trail engineering and design. That design was delayed slightly due to some legal issues that were experienced on NCDOT's end, And those had to be resolved through a lease agreement with the city. So that lease agreement for the rail trail land was approved in 2015 by City Council. And then in 2017, we contracted with Moffitt and Nickel and Land Design to design the trail. In 2019, we were awarded a CMAQ grant, or a Congestion Management and Air Quality grant from NCDOT to support right-of-way acquisition and utility relocation for just the southern half of the rail trail. So it's just the portion south of where Main Street and Central divide off from one another, down to Greenway Street. That award amount was $1.8 million, and it included a 20% local match, so a $360,000 contribution from the city. And then the northern portion, which is, kind of the other half of the project, is incorporated into NCDOT's I-85 widening project. So they will actually complete that as they are widening I-85 and redoing the interchange in that location. This is just a quick snippet. So this is the portion of the rail trail that is covered by the CMAQ funding that we received. And it just shows some portions, some snapshots of the trail design at different locations along the trail, and kind of the feel and the aesthetics that are envisioned for the trail. But diving into some more of the nitty-gritty financial details, so CMAQ funds have some particular unique constraints, given that they are coming to us from NCDOT, yes, but kind of routed through NCDOT. They're a federal funding source. So they have just some additional hoops to jump through compared to maybe some other local or statewide grant sources. So CMAQ provides us a 10-year time frame to complete full construction of the portion that's covered by that grant. So just this bottom half, that $1.8 million is not anticipated to cover the full cost of construction for that portion. That's estimated to be around $6 million. And so if we wish to use the CMAQ funds, these are issued on a reimbursement basis. So we can be reimbursed for that $1.8 million, less, the city's contribution of that 20% match. But in order to receive those reimbursements, we need to have full construction completed of that portion by 2029, so 10 years after we've received the initial award. So, all of that being said, the key takeaway here, getting straight to the point, we have some decisions to make about whether we want to use the CMAQ funds. If we want to use the CMAQ funds, we need to identify a path forward for funding and completing the rest of construction by 2029. Otherwise, we need to evaluate whether we want to accept those funds at all. At this point, we have not used CMAQ funding. We have not, gone forward with that, but we need to start deciding, sooner than later, because even though it's 5 years out, I think we all know some of these projects take a lot longer than you would hope. So even though we're 5 years out, technically, it's definitely, we're kind of coming up on crunch time.
Do those estimates have any inflationary factors added to them, or is that today's dollars?
Tiffany, do you know off the top of your head? I'm not sure off the top of my head.
Is this from 2015 when they approved it, is what you're asking?
No, I know it's
2019.
more recent than that.
2019?
I think
They
it's
approved
2019.
this.
So I believe this was the estimate that was included in the 2023 PED plan, where they tried to include some inflationary dollars, but keep in mind, because the initial design costs were only allocated at $153,000, I believe, in the initial budget, the level of engineering is not to the point where we would feel comfortable putting the project out for bid or having a solid estimate.
Sure. And under those assumptions, you're talking about roughly a $4.5 million contribution from the city, including the matching funds?
Or commitment or ability to pursue other alternative funding sources.
That's correct.
Just a quick question, and I don't mean this deeper, but who quoted the $6 million? Was that our previous city engineer?
Yeah, that's what I was
That was
Where's
part
that
of
number? Where's
the
that
PED
number?
plan estimate, right?
So the original estimates were actually produced by Moffitt and Nickel, who's been the
Oh.
design engineer for the rail trail project since its initiation. I believe that contract was originally pursued by NCDOT with some rail division dollars to help offset the cost of design as sort of a collaborative design initiative. And then there was a city-funded portion for the remainder. They were also the group that helped us get some initial acquisition agreements, but not actual easements, right? So we still haven't been able to pursue right-of-way because we don't have funding specifically allocated to do so.
There's an issue with the right of way too, isn't there? I mean, there's one property in particular. Oh, yes.
We've heard that there might be interest, but we haven't been able to pursue further right-of-way negotiations because we don't have that contract on board yet. And so instead of having that as staff without the ability to secure that right-of-way, we would need the ability to move forward and pursue right-of-way with more transparency that the council is interested in moving the project.
There's issues with utility relocation potentially, and like guardrails and
We're
potentially
working through
additional
those.
easements.
We are working through those to try to reduce and minimize costs as much as possible.
Wasn't one of the property owners associated with the rail trail also associated with Rocky Branch?
Yes, I think
Yes.
that's correct.
That's correct. So, yes, to the point that was just made, there's about a $4.5 million shortfall there that
And if we exhausted
someone needs to come up
or
with.
explored any and all options for grant funding from,
You're reading my mind.
okay.
Yep, so wanted to just share a couple avenues for funding that would not lead to the city contributing all of that for $4.5 million to complete this portion of the project. I think, frankly, in my opinion, I think one of the most promising options is submitting a 2025 RAISE grant. That application is currently open, it just opened. That application would be through USDOT, so it is another federal funding source. And applications are due January 30th. So this is not me formally asking to proceed with this funding application, but if we decide that this is a path we'd like to pursue, I would likely come back to y'all in the coming weeks or month or so to ask for your blessing to move forward with that grant application.
Could we go ahead and give her a blessing on that? Because that's,
Was that gonna be enough time?
yeah.
Because I know with these big grants, there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. You might need outside services potentially, depending on what the expertise is required.
I think we would try as hard as we can to get that application in.
In worst case, I'm assuming it comes with some sort of stipulation that you have to use the funds within a certain period of time, so if you don't, you just.
Then you're just out of it.
Right.
Exactly. Yep. So this grant has a $1 million award minimum and a $25 million award maximum. We actually qualify as a rural area under this grant, which means that we could be exempt from the local match requirements. The rail trail is also located partially in what the U.S. Census Bureau considers to be a historically disadvantaged area. So that's another criteria under which we would not have to provide any local match. So we kind of have those two factors working in our favor. And just so we're all aware, eligible applicants, including local governments, can submit up to 3 separate RAISE grants. So, not volunteering to submit 3 different grant applications, but if there are other capital projects, capital transportation needs that we've identified, applying for
Can't think of
one
where we
would
would
not
find any
keep
of that.
Right.
I'm assuming, is it just one grant with a maximum, like a total pot of $25 million, and there will probably be multiple applicants that they'll disperse that to?
So the total pot is, I believe, in the billions.
Oh.
So
Oh, so
the
it's up to.
maximum award amount that we can apply for, we could apply for up to 25 million.
But just for one project, right?
Yeah.
Are we looking for, like, other road improvements or be funded with something like this, or?
I think that this project is probably the one that we have the most information on, given that we still have Moffett Nickel, under contract, engineering wise. We have a pretty good idea where the trail needs to go, and the design is a % complete. I'm sure that gives us a better idea of the questions that they're gonna ask us inside the application that we, fill out. If we start adding on other, transportation improvement projects, it'd be a little more generalized, because there's not enough
time, I don't think, between now and by the time that's due to get a finer estimate on what the detail is, but if you want directly us to go that way, we'll work as quickly as we can.
Are these annual?
That's what I was about to ask, is this really?
So this is an annual program, but it's funded, it's got a limit on funding. So this latest iteration was funded through the bipartisan infrastructure law, so it's got a sunset. I believe it sunsets next year, so FY 2026, or it might be FY 2027.
Is there a
I can
stipulation
confirm
on how
that
much
for
we
you.
can receive?
No, sorry, repeat your question?
Like if we apply for it this year, we get 5 million,
Yeah.
does that limit how much we can apply for next year?
No, it does not. Yeah, and so receiving, one grant award in a given year does not keep us from applying for further funding in future years, and applying or receiving one award, doesn't actually limit us even from receiving other awards this year. So if we submitted multiple applications, it's not like they would pick one to award to Belmont. We could potentially be funded for several if we applied for
I don't
several.
want to detract any more from Reagan's presentation, but I think it's definitely something maybe on the side or afterwards we can talk about with potentially other capital needs and their eligibility for this type of grant. But, I mean, as far as the rail trail, I'd say definitely let's pursue.
Pursue,
So I would,
Yeah.
agree.
give you the
Assuming
most
staff
time you
can-
need to get it
Yeah,
done.
If
awesome.
you need a blessing.
Yeah, you're blessed,
Thank
let's
you.
go.
Awesome. The other locally available grant program that provides, I think, the most comparable type of grant award is the Recreational Trails Program Grant, or the RTP, that's available through the state of North Carolina, but those award amounts are up to $100,000. So that does not go nearly as far towards the total sum that we need to come up with in the time frame that we need. And there is a 25% local match requirement as well. So that's, I think, better suited for some smaller projects that we can kind of knock out with a smaller source of funds. So a great opportunity, I think, to keep in mind for the future. So with that, I know that was a lot of information and some good discussion already. Like I mentioned before, we'll have some more time for discussion at the end. So I'm gonna kind of shift gears now and go into the Abbey Creek Greenway, and then we can kind of discuss all the decision points that I'm putting before you at that point. So the Abbey Creek Greenway is a planned 10-foot multi-use path in Greenway. It's proposed to run from just outside Kevin Lofton Riverfront Park to the intersection of Park Street and McLean Avenue. It generally runs parallel to Wilkinson Boulevard and Abbey Creek, and it'll provide a paved alternative, so it's planned to be a paved surface trail to Wilkinson Boulevard that allows folks to walk, bike, use their strollers, roll, and move their families to key destinations like Kevin Lofton Riverfront Park, the City Rec Center, and even the City Works building. If they're looking to access their city staff and ask questions of us or get resources, they're able to do that ideally using this Greenway as well, without putting themselves at risk along Wilkinson Boulevard, which currently does not have full sidewalks along the full segment from Park Street to Catawba Street. In addition, this planned location will provide opportunities for environmental education through partnerships that we've explored already with Catawba Riverkeeper to help do some education around the creek itself, potentially some interactive educational opportunities with our local students and other local volunteers who are interested in creek cleanups. So this can be a destination, or not only necessarily a transportation solution, but also a destination for educational programming about how we keep our water bodies healthy and what it means to live along a peninsula kind of surrounded by water bodies that are critical to the success of our community and our region. The alignment is also primarily proposed to be located within an existing public works sewer easement, which first will help streamline our right-of-way acquisition efforts, and second will allow our public works staff, when it's fully built out, a bit easier access to that sewer infrastructure in the area to help maintain it. There's an existing aerial sewer that at a certain location, that line becomes very difficult to access because it runs kind of over a gully. And so it's we've heard anecdotally it's challenging for our public works staff to get in there and access it. They have to kind of maneuver around the topography there very carefully. So in 2012, the Abbey Creek Greenway was added to the CIP, and like I mentioned, it's envisioned as that 1.25 mile trail running parallel to Wilkinson. In 2019, we made a significant step forward through the conditional approval of the Morris at Belmont, which is now Belmont Reverie. So that project, when it was approved, they committed to constructing the portion of the Greenway located on their site as part of their approval. And at the completion of that development, their Greenway right-of-way will be dedicated to the city, and maintenance responsibilities will fall to us.
Can you remind me, what was the distance that they built out of the 1.2 miles?
I believe it was between a half mile and 3/4 of a mile. It was slightly under half of the full Greenway.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the remaining portions are up to the city to construct, and I'll show a map in just a second. In 2020, we contracted with the engineering firm EXP to design the remaining city portions. We were supported by grants from Carolina Thread Trail and the Gaston Community Foundation to do that work. And to date, we are at a 90% completion, we've gotten to 90% design for those plans. So that design is very well fleshed out. And in 2022, City Council adopted a capital project ordinance for the remaining portion, so for the city's portion of the Greenway. That capital project ordinance was for a total of just under 2.2 million. It includes everything from design to right-of-way acquisition to construction. There's also some funds in there for public art. But at the time, council only authorized staff to proceed with right-of-way acquisition, which we do have another grant from Carolina Thread Trail at the moment to support that. Just a couple quick images to remind you of the vision for the Abbey Creek Greenway. There are certain portions, because it does cross over the creek, where there have been envisioned, boardwalk segments and bridges to kind of help folks get closer to the Greenway and see more, or to the creek, and see more of those environmental features without harming them. And this is the Abbey Creek Greenway to date. So you all might remember visiting this during your comprehensive plan city tour with us in August. But this is some of the segment that's further back into the forest, and really isolated, very serene. Despite its proximity to Wilkinson Boulevard, it's very easy to forget that you're not just in the middle of the forest. This is a map of the alignment for the Greenway, and so the portion in the maroon rectangle on the screen is what was completed as part of the Morris. The remaining segments are what would be completed by the city. The Carolina Thread Trail grant that we've received is assisting us with right-of-way acquisition efforts for the first 6 parcels that have been identified as needing Greenway easements. So that's parcels 1 through 6 on the top left, or the northwest corner of the slide. And so those efforts are underway now through our contract with THC, which is a land acquisition firm. So where are we now? The Morris, or Belmont Reverie, that project is nearing closeout. So one of our last steps is we are actively coordinating with Duke Energy to locate the trailhead on the western side of the Greenway. So that will be just adjacent to parcel 1 in that top left corner. They have an existing overhead power line easement, so we're working with them to make sure that alignment works for us, but also works for Duke, so they can maintain their infrastructure. But once that's finalized, that's really the last step before the Morris can move forward with recording and approving their final plat. And at that point, the city will be asked to accept the streets that are part of that development, but also the Greenway right-of-way for maintenance. We anticipate this occurring soon, likely in the next several months, and want to just highlight here, given that the Morris section is the only portion that's complete right now, this does pose just some challenges for our public works folks and also for PD as we look to accept, maintenance of the trail, but also security for the trail. Because currently the eastern, kind of southeastern end of the Greenway stops in the middle of the woods, essentially. So, in order to allow a bit easier access for our maintenance crews and for PD if they need to respond to an issue, building out that eastern portion is likely to be a significant help to that. But even if we can just get to, I believe that's 6th Street is the next intersection there, to open up some additional, the other side of the Greenway for access would be helpful. So with that, let's see. As I mentioned before, council authorized staff at the time of the capital project ordinance to only proceed through right-of-way acquisition. So we have done that. And then of the 2.2 or so million that were approved in that ordinance, it was anticipated that 500,000 or so would come from grant funds, and that does include the grant funds that I've mentioned tonight from Carolina Thread Trail and the Gaston Community Foundation, as well as about 1.7 million in loan proceeds from the water and sewer fund that would be paid back over time. So the key here is originally the $500,000 in grant funds were anticipated to primarily come from state capital infrastructure fund grants or SCIF grants, but many of those funds have actually since been allocated toward other capital improvements in the city, like the skate park and the city rec building. So we will likely need to seek, again, additional grant funds to kind of finish out this this project and the construction. We can also look at other opportunities. So like I mentioned before, this trail is planned to be a paved trail, but we can also look at opportunities to evaluate whether a natural surface trail might be a better solution, or at least an interim solution to help us complete that construction sooner. But the key point at which we find ourselves from the staff perspective is since we have not been authorized to proceed with construction, we can't go out and get, up-to-date construction estimates. So we're not really sure at this point what we're facing, since these estimates are a little bit older. So if council's comfortable with it, we are asking for authorization to proceed with construction on this greenway so that we can put out an RFP and ask for construction bids, so then we can pursue additional information about what we're actually up against in terms of funding the remainder of this greenway. I do want to remind y'all that, of course, you'll be asked to review any potential contract that we might consider entering into, so you would have an opportunity again to review that before we actually spend any of that money on construction. But that's the status that we're at for Abbey Creek. So, with that, quick recap. I know this has been a lot of information, and appreciate y'all bearing with me through this. But for Belmont Rail Trail, the CMAQ funds, we've been awarded, but we need that additional funding secured to support construction if we're going to accept CMAQ funds. So noting the constraints of that funding, are we comfortable proceeding with using it? And along with the above, are we comfortable committing to the 2029 deadline for trail construction? And it sounds to me, based on our conversation from a couple minutes ago, that the answer is kind of dependent on the results of a potential RAISE grant application. Does that sound right?
That would be accurate.
Yeah. Is there any additional discussion we want to have about the rail trail at this time, or do we feel good about that?
I mean, just based off of historical here, for the past 3 years, we always kind of talk about this one. I think I actually asked to have this recap again on these trails, just to understand where we are with this. It always comes down to that one property in regards to the right-of-way acquisition over there off Circle Drive. Again, I think we should do the grant. I think that's great. Hopefully it covers the whole thing, because again, $6 million is a big ticket, and that's kind of probably a little bit more now considering the infrastructure constraints that we have right now. And the $13.5 million project we have sitting out there, that was a little bit more. But I think the question that needs to be answered here is, will the owners of that property allow it or not, right? I mean, because that's where, Jim, am I wrong? Because that's where we always land back on.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's almost like a chicken or the egg problem,
Yeah.
because we can't negotiate without the funding,
Right.
and we don't want to fund if we can't get the property.
Right,
The
right.
staff's never been directed like me to go approach the property owner, if that's something that we want to consider.
I think, because I believe Martha was handling that.
I don't know where that, it was Martha and Richard were both,
Yes.
and then I don't know what ended up happening.
Well,
I think it would probably be best if it,
Either me or we could, use the firm THC that we have under contract for,
I'd rather have you.
I think
Yeah.
that's personal touch.
personal touch.
I've seen how these firms are like, at least with the Julia Avenue people.
that's a good point.
And what the receptiveness or lack thereof
Yes.
might be on the part of the property owner,
Exactly.
With that.
third party show up.
I mean, is everyone okay with asking
Yeah.
Lois?
Yeah.
Because I think that's, if the owner of the property says no, right, or the son or whatever, then I mean, it's, we can't do it, because there's limitations with the rate, right?
Yes, there's, I won't rehash that, but yes.
No, I don't.
Yeah, yeah,
So
exactly.
that's direction currently, and then
I think that's the best,
revisit.
is pursue the grant, and then,
Two work streams.
Miles will approach the property owner. But I don't think we're comfortable doing anything else until we,
Yeah.
because that's a big price.
And I think if you're looking for direction, for me personally, I wouldn't feel comfortable with authorizing this project right now with the climate and the situation that's going on in the city, particularly again, as we come out of the rec center. This is a big ticket for a trail, right?
Yes.
Could we possibly include the Abbey Creek Greenway in the
That's a good question.
raise
We
grant?
could look at that, yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. I think because they have such similar kind of intended outcomes, or we could at least, program the narrative that way about how they're providing alternatives for pedestrian and cycling infrastructure. I think we could definitely explore, kind of lumping those two under one grant application.
The rail trail is gonna run parallel to what will ultimately be the trolley, correct?
Correct.
Does anybody have
From the trolley, yeah.
Does anybody have any concerns about safety with that?
I
Or
think
is
you
this
have to,
already-
that's what Jim was saying.
Yeah.
Railings that have to be put up.
Well, let's talk about that.
Yeah, I will note,
Oh, good question.
that's been a big, factor for consideration that has gone into the design of the Greenway so far. And NCDOT's rail division has been involved in those conversations as well, but, to my knowledge, they are designing the trail with that in mind. So trying to make sure there's enough space to preserve the rail right of way and any access that would be needed there, and then ensure there's a sufficient distance from the trolley.
Which will not
in
be
order to operate.
operating very fast.
No, yeah,
Are you
my
referring-
understanding is
But-
it's
I can tell
very
you that
slow.
it's gonna have drunk college kids on it.
Yeah.
There's no telling what's gonna happen on
But are you referring to specifically the 74 crossing?
that. Just all of it.
I mean, he's
I'm
talking
thinking
about even behind Circle Drive.
Yeah, I'm talking about just down the road, years from down the road, I can see this being a safety issue.
Yeah.
You got some.
That was my
some
initial
kid-
thought on the whole
I
idea.
think it's
jumping off the
so
trail.
It's on the radar, it's
beneficial
been
because
part of the discussion.
in a lot of areas, and correct me if I'm wrong, isn't the actual rail itself where the trolley's gonna be is elevated?
Slightly elevated.
And the trail where you're gonna walk is down here, but Charlie still brings up a good point. We might wanna understand what the safety aspect of that is.
It's been discussed during trolley board meetings as well, in terms of their discussions with NCDOT.
What are they looking at as far as safety?
Oh, I see.
Well, that's what, this potential guardrail or something, now that will,
I'm saying,
There
the
was
kid
a-
can walk, step right over a guardrail.
Oh, she said at the bottom.
Oh, yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
With our discussions with Moffett Nickel, they have been in touch with NCDOT, rail folks throughout the entire process, talking through the safety aspects of it. And to my understanding is that there was gonna be a pretty tall fence in between like the rail and the actual sidewalk itself, and then we had concerns about what that would look like. You're basically putting a fence right down through the center of the city,
Yeah.
because you have a rail on one side, and so then there was some discussions about keeping that within the existing right of way, because we didn't want to acquire additional right of way and the separation between the tracks and the sidewalk. So they've got it all planned out, as far as I understand, with Moffett Nickel, and they've met months and months throughout, probably the last year, I think, going back and forth with NCDOT. It's kind of hard to get some answers from the rail division, so we we put that on Moffett Nickel to kind of track down the answers, and that's part of the design, is to keep that safety aspect, and top concern there.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
And I-
So to speak.
I knew that was coming.
That's a good question.
Yes.
Well said. Perfect. Anything else related to the rail trail? And those concerns are well received for sure, so we'll keep those in mind as we move forward. All right. Thinking about now Abbey Creek Greenway, with the Morris segment having been built out and that right-of-way, that request to accept the right-of-way coming to you soon, want to just remind y'all of the benefits of, the city completing our portion, the opportunities that presents to streamline greenway and sewer maintenance in that area, as well as trail security, while also providing that much-needed alternative for pedestrians and cyclists who are looking to travel parallel to Wilkinson Boulevard. So with that, my question to y'all is, what outstanding questions or concerns do y'all need to have addressed before we're comfortable authorizing to proceed with construction, if any?
I think with the Abbey Creek Greenway, and the comment in regards to taking a loan out of the water and sewer, we just raised rates, right?
Yeah.
So now we're gonna be trying to take a loan off of a non-necessary project such as the rail trail. I personally don't feel comfortable with that, because I can't explain that.
Yeah.
I understand the benefit of the access to the lines that are out there existingly, but for 2.2, and that's low, for whatever the new price of it is, I don't think that's appropriate.
I agree.
I think we need to sit on these grant opportunities and see what comes from this application, if the Abbey can be included to that.
I like Miles' suggestion of
Mhm.
trying to roll it up.
And then to the.
And see if that's an opportunity that.
I know that those interfund loans caused heartache in the past in some other contexts, so yes, I agree that would probably not be my preferred funding source.
No, definitely not.
Yeah, given the capital project ordinance, I believe specifically states that language in there, if we didn't want to use the water and sewer fund, I'm kind of looking at Jared at this point, that's an amendment to the capital project ordinance.
So that's part of the original ordinance, and in the minutes from that meeting, it does talk about a water sewer loan, but you can get a little bit strategic with financing. You could, it is difficult to get financing for items like that because there's no collateral to the loan, but you can get strategic, and we can get a loan and do other CIP projects with brick and mortar and roll the loan, funding for that into that loan and get it approved.
Yeah, because I remember when that was brought up, Jim, and it was contentious at that time. And I actually had voted in favor of proceeding with it, but again, that was before we understood the financial limitations of the water and sewer.
Yeah.
fund.
Just the concept of taking a loan.
Yeah, I feel like that was done in another,
It was a couple years ago.
yeah, but it was done in another, for another project.
Yeah.
It caused some heartache, but I can't.
It was for a paving project.
We won't proceed with that loan proceeds from water and sewer fund. We'll proceed with the grant funding first, and then once we determine whether we get the grant funds, we'll determine like how we pay for it. If we don't get the grant funds, we'll come back and say, we didn't get it, let's continue more discussion with, how to fund it.
I have a question about the Greenway itself. What's the slope like on that thing?
There's a lot of topography. This map isn't the best to show it. I think it does have some topography on that map, but it's just very faint. And so that's kind of what I was getting at earlier, where you can kind of see, so there's, it's a very steep gully down into where the creek is located. So we've worked closely with Gaston County and, their floodplain folks and, soil and erosion folks to make sure that at least the Morris's segment was not located in a location where the topography and potential rainwater would, or stormwater would cause issues there, but.
Yeah, I'm thinking more along, if you're gonna be on the Greenway here, you're probably gonna go, start at the top and work your way down. I don't imagine too many people are gonna go up the Greenway.
Up the other direction.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
And if
can,
that's,
do you want,
Well, if you come from that way, I guess you have to go back.
get an Uber back.
Sure, so this one, specifically for the slope of the Greenway itself was unique in that the vision from the start was that this would be more of an accessible trail opportunity. I know Ray had mentioned in her presentation strollers, or that people would roll. That's specifically to allow for handicapped utilization of this Greenway. And so there are some trail accessibility guidelines that are a little bit more forgiving than the ADA requirements, but I believe that at no time would the slope, even in specific concentrated areas, exceed 8%. But in the majority of the corridor, it should not exceed a 5% slope. So it's only for those specifically very tight areas for a very limited and short segment would it be allowed to go to an 8% slope as it's currently designed with the paved surface. If we looked at an alternative opportunity, we might not be able to meet that if we had to reroute or do something else, but that's currently how it's engineered and designed in order to be more accessible for more families.
So that's what I'm just thinking from like a practicality standpoint. Is anybody actually gonna go up the Greenway?
You could, it's designed to be able to able to go both ways without having to feel like you're going completely uphill in either one, and it's supposed to fade
Uphill
and
both
grade
ways.
out.
Depends on how much pain you want to endure.
Right.
With the Abbey Creek Greenway, because a lot of that goes through some pretty dark, unlit, really kind of rural areas. Are there any plans for lighting? Are there any concerns over safety, PD over this area that we need to be aware of?
At this time, Tiffany, you might want to come back. So I don't believe there are plans to add lighting along the Greenway at this time. From what's already been constructed, we haven't heard, significant complaints, and I might look to Chief as well, but yeah, we haven't heard significant safety complaints at this time, so that's something to keep an eye on though, for sure, as we
I mean,
accept
you've got a
maintenance.
1.2 mile stretch there in the middle of the night, people are looking for mischief. That's a perfect place to,
Presumably it wouldn't be open in the middle of the night, but obviously
Well,
that's
no,
not gonna
stop, you can close it off.
Presumably, so there's no plans to run like dedicated lighting with the exact thought of trying to encourage the thought that it's closed. But that being said, if public safety is a concern, there might be possibilities to install some sort of camera or type device to ensure continued visibility or signage that would deter certain types of activities from happening on the trail.
Is that a parking lot, in Space One?
So it's just outside of Space One, but yes, so this trailhead up here that we are coordinating with Duke Energy on is envisioned to be a trailhead with a parking lot.
is that right there where the bank's going?
Right there.
Yes, across the street.
Street right there.
And then the reason there's not a dedicated trailhead necessarily on the eastern portion is because this alignment is projected to come out right in this area, so near City Works and City Rec, as well as Captain Lofton Riverfront Park.
Now
So
we-
the idea is there's available
Would it
parking in that
be-
area.
Chief, would it be necessary to have one of those block cameras in that parking lot?
We could have some Wi-Fi cameras installed out there.
Okay.
The other thing I was gonna suggest, when you talk about lighting, the more equitable lighting source would probably be some, solar lighting of some sort would probably be more equitable for not having to run those underground lines as long as it is, because it's mild.
Absolutely.
We have some right of way on the Gaston College campus though too. That was part of the textile center approval.
That's
So
right.
that's some portion that we at least have the right of way. We didn't make them build the trail like the Morris agreed to,
Right.
but
But yeah, we do have the easement shown on their final plat for that
Yeah.
Greenway right of way. That's correct.
Well, so the deadline is for that raise grant was January 25th,
January 30th.
but you probably don't find out in the winters till,
It would likely be, later in 2025, so probably.
not that we can know that by the retreat, or,
that would be pretty quick by government standards.
yeah,
Sure.
okay.
I think what would be helpful too, if this does move forward, is understanding what the ongoing maintenance costs would be for both of these trails, because I know, understand that inflation will go up, right? But if we get some projections to that, that would be helpful.
Yeah.
Secondly, and maybe this is just me remembering correctly, but I could have sworn when we did the budget last, we removed one of these projects and only kept one in. And I think we kept the Abbey Creek in, and what we did was it was in that financial model to try to project out where we wanted to set the tax rate at.
Right.
So I just wanted to call that out, that one of these, I think it was the rail trail, was pulled out or turned off, as we called it. Jared shaking his head yes. and we kept the Abbey Creek Greenway in there. So just as an FYI, the rail trail is currently not in the budget, so I just kind of wanted to make that.
Good point.
What, do you remember what year we had the Abbey Creek?
There isn't I actually had it pulled up. There's not a year assigned to it, but it's earmarked for 1.6 million, which is similar to what we have in the ordinance for loan proceeds, and that's listed as pay-go, not debt issuance. So we would be using unassigned fund balance to pay for it.
Okay. So that changes the model itself.
I agree, I just wanna make sure that when you say it's not in the budget.
I mean, it could be in the budget in the next budget cycle.
Right, but I understand that, yes, that's fair, but it was never, I mean.
But that's how we set the tax.
Yeah, I
rate, is by
understand, but I'm just
setting
making sure that
projects.
we're being accurate in how we're,
But that's what dictated how we set the tax rate, is what I'm
Yes.
trying to say.
yes,
How can you plan it, you don't plan it, you know?
right.
I guess any council can change anything
Yes.
tomorrow.
Awesome. So it sounds to me like our directive on both of these projects is to explore the raise grant to start and then come back with an update after that application process and, depending on how that goes, see how we move forward from there. Any other directives or any other questions for staff that you'd like us to come back with?
Not at this time.
You did great, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so
Very
much for the
informative.
presentation.
Before we adjourn, Miles, do we need to have any sort of discussion about the December regular meeting, or, are we, I know we talked about maybe doing, a special meeting for Lakeview Farms as standalone, or where are we with that?
If y'all would like for us to move it, then that's, right now it's scheduled for, the regular meeting in December. You're talking about for the Lakeview Farms annexation.
I mean, if we feel like,
It's already gonna be a late meeting, right?
yeah,
Because we're starting at 7:30.
yeah.
And it's already a pretty heavy evening based off of.
I'm not, I think some things have been,
Like
Yeah.
some text amendments.
there'll be a couple text amendments, but other than that, I think
There's a
that's.
big hefty consent agenda. We've moved a lot of things on consent, trying to load it up. 3 items, knowing that the meeting starts at 7:30, and annexation being a majority of that. But so I guess the direction 6 months ago was that we would have the public hearing, we continue the public hearing to the December meeting date, which means that you would have to still open it up and continue it again, I believe, till the next date that y'all would like to put it. Which
And that's
is-
assuming everyone was available at whatever date that would be.
We had,
Yeah.
I don't know if we've checked with Lakeview Farms to see if that's a possibility. I know that
We have not, we have checked with Kimley Horn on their availability for the second, as well as the Lakeview Farms team, but we have not checked any alternative dates.
I mean, I feel like that one's gonna go pretty long.
Yeah.
Right? And if we're starting late,
Yeah.
maybe I kick the question to you, Miles and Tiffany. I mean, you guys are gonna be the ones kind of going through and presenting it, and staff, y'all too. I mean, the requirements to be here. I mean, we're starting at 7:30. We can easily look back and say this is gonna probably be a 2-hour conversation at least.
What does the agenda look like for the work session in December? Is that pretty heavy too?
I don't think there's anything on there right now. You know,
Typically, a lot of times these major development projects have had their own night.
Yeah,
Yes.
we did that with the Delaware.
There's nothing on the work session agenda, I mean, that seems like a,
Is everybody gonna be able to make that though, with the holidays?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, we'd have to find something that everyone can
Right.
come to. Because I mean, with Del Webb, we just made it on a standalone.
Sixteenth is
Yeah.
the council battle first.
I'm available.
I'm available. I think we should move it. I think that's unfair to make everyone sit here.
Well, I mean, everyone should be heard and we should make decisions when we're as fresh and mindful as we can be. I think the longer these things last, sometimes at least my decision-making isn't as rational as it is.
Is it something we have to vote on, or can we run home and check our schedule and then let you guys know?
Well, we need to let the developer know, Kimley Horn. So I would say that at this time, we would like to move it,
Okay.
and we will check with our consultants and the development team. If they say no, they can't meet on that date, we'll have to let you all know at the December meeting and
Yeah.
to set a special meeting other than
Mhm.
December 16th.
Let's explore it. I think it would be, I want everyone to have their chance to be heard. And I want us to be able to make a decision like not at midnight. Because I've seen some of the decisions that get made at midnight.
Yeah.
They're not the best.
Yeah, public, yeah.
And the public too,
Big.
Okay. Well, that was, we'll follow up and see.
Yep.
There being nothing else.
Actually, one more thing.
Oh, one more thing.
On behalf of council, I'd like to welcome our city manager to the Fast 50 Club. And we'll wish him happy birthday tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
Happy
Join-
birthday.
Happy early birthday. I'm not there yet.
You got a little ways.
Not even close.
Probably like a real 50-year-old.
Take it easy, don't take a nap for then.
Well, thank you, Jason. Happy birthday. Yes. So unless we still be meeting when you turn 50. Motion to adjourn made by Alex. Second by Jason. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? You're not opposed? No. All right, pass. Meeting adjourned.